Hey everyone, I'm Jay and I do stuff. Welcome to an all-new edition of Idea Dump. If you follow me, you'll know I have a newfound fascination with the obscure game Tonic Trouble. I made a video talking about the original game a while back, which I recommend watching first for context. I'll be here when you get back, don't worry. These days, the game doesn't get much if any recognition from Ubisoft. There are little hints of it here and there, especially when it comes to Rayman, and given how one of the characters appear in one of the Rayman games, both final release and prototype, I personally like to categorize Tonic Trouble as a Rayman spin-off / side series if anything. It really wouldn't be much different from how Mario characters like Donkey Kong, Yoshi, Wario, and even Luigi have their own dedicated side series within the main Mario franchise. Some will argue that the game was never meant to be a full series, as it was supposedly only a beta test for Rayman 2. But I feel that isn't really a good enough excuse to discourage discussion and deeper diving. I only do this cause it's fun and interesting after all, so let me have this, please. One thing that does cling to my mind is what a potential remake of this game could look like. The original game, whether it be Nintendo 64 or PC, really wasn't bad. Unless you're just that overly cynical.
There is certainly a reason why we'll never see Ed again, I can tell you that much. Who even cares about him? Probably the first time you've heard of Tonic Trouble before.
However, there are things that could definitely be improved upon or added. I personally believe this game should have a second chance and could greatly benefit from some kind of remake. Ubisoft could stand to have more cartoony, colorful, and lighthearted IPs that aren't hyper-realistically dark and gritty. Unfortunately, given how brushed to the side and forgotten this game is, the chances of it getting a remake or even a simple port of the original are highly unlikely. It'd be a real shame, since regardless of if the game's actually good or not, it does hold historical significance being one of Ubisoft's very first 3D games. Heck, there's even a bunch of fascinating articles, concept art, and ideas from the game's development that never made the final cut that only fans were able to dig up years later. It would be a waste of such charming characters and worlds just to leave it all behind. But for the purpose of this video series, let's play optimist and imagine ways that the game could be remade, whether it be an official release or a fan-made overhaul like Rayman Redemption. Much like my Rayman Remake trilogy video, I'm gonna go into this with the mindset that you already know the gist of the original Tonic Trouble. Or even better, you've seen my initial video on it. Just so that I don't have to overly explain everything so that I can get to the newer ideas. Unlike other remakes, I feel it'd be necessary to at least partially reimagine the experience rather than just remake the original but with prettier visuals. So that means in addition to potential new features, some of the existing features from the original game are subject to change completely. This is all for the purpose of making the game feel more fleshed out and less clunky and primitive. But at the same time not make too many drastic changes to where the game is unrecognizable from the original. I'll leave stuff like the cut Crazy Town level for another time. Wink. One fork in the road we face is which version of Tonic Trouble to go off of as a base. We have the PC retail / Nintendo 64 version most are familiar with, but then we also have the Special Edition, aka the Beta PC version. The Special Edition is very different in that the level designs are all new and more open than the retail version. Not to mention the awful and stiff tank controls. But also, the Special Edition just feels more barren and empty compared to the retail version. A lot of the characters from the retail version don't even appear in the Special Edition, outside of a few cameos in the credits. With that in mind, I'm gonna do something similar I did with my ideas for a Rayman 2 remake and take elements from both versions of the game as I see fit. Also, for the title, I'm calling it Tonic Trouble Redose. Seems fitting enough. Starting with the controls, I undoubtedly would stick closer to the retail version's traditional controls. Movement would feel more snappy and modernized, kinda like Spyro Reignited or Mario Odyssey. You could also now fully rotate the game's camera with the right stick. Ed would still have all his moves from the original, but some would be tweaked to feel easier to use. For example, using the pea shooter would always enter sort of a third-person over-the-shoulder view. You can still move around freely with the left stick, but you can also aim the shooter separately with either the right stick or the controller's gyro function, provided it even has it. In addition, Ed no longer shoots bees from his stick. Instead, he shoots sharp seeds gained from either bouncing bags laying on the ground or from defeated vegetable enemies. The pogo stick would have a bit more versatility to it. In addition to maneuvering over dangerous terrain and ground pounding, it can also be used to jump up higher to previously unreachable places and platforms. Finally, gliding with Ed's bow tie would feel less heavy and you could turn more easily without taking an unintentional nosedive. In terms of level design, I would mostly base the levels off their more open design from the Special Edition. However, I would try to condense them a little bit with some of the more linear sections from the retail versions to feel more organically structured. But it would still allow for a bit more exploration. As for collectibles, in the original game you needed to have collected most of the general antidote swirls in order to access the end of the game. Here I would take a page from my Rayman 1 remake and have it so that collecting all the antidotes aren't required to beat the game normally. But you still are encouraged to get all of them for 100% completion. More on that later. I would also get rid of extra lives and the live system altogether. They seem rather pointless considering you usually lose a bit of health whenever you fall down a pit or something. But what would they be replaced with, you may ask? Again, more on that later. I promise, I'm building towards something. One of the original Tonic Trouble's strengths, in my opinion, are the diverse and unique characters. In this theoretical remake, I would change some aspects of the cast. Firstly, in addition to newer updated designs, all the characters would now have visible limbs. Except for Ed and his alien species because they're aliens. They can look like anything. Second would be tweaks to their characteristics and personalities. Little known fact, but the manual for the PC retail version actually has bios for most of the characters. So I'm mostly gonna base them off those descriptions. Starting with Ed, he'd be more or less the same in terms of character and design. He'd still be a clumsy oaf who isn't the brightest. I feel he'd be a bit more expressive in terms of emotions thanks in part to modern 3D animation. I would aim to make him look a little cuter as well, instead of the semi-ugly grin they sometimes give him. I also added a subtle little button on his bow tie to activate his glide. The Doc would have a bit more of a deranged look to his design. He'd be a bit more kooky in his characteristics as well as take a bit more interest in Ed, him being an alien and all. The machine he creates to catapult Ed would also look more kinetic in how it works and how the parts connect, including the dominoes and piggy banks. With Agent XYZ, while he'd still be completely concealed by his newspaper, you can still see limbs coming out from his hands and feet, which would give him more of an authoritative appearance. He'd even have this new animation where he folds himself into his newspaper instead of phasing in and out of existence. Grog would now go by Grog the Heckish rather than Hellish to at least attempt for an E or E10 rating. By extension, his underlings would also be classified as Hecklings. Again, he'd also have limbs, but after drinking the tonic can, he'd become distinctly more buff with glowing green veins and static effects for that ultimate power look. The pharmacist from that one section of the pressure cooker level, I feel should have a bit more of a presence this time around. After all, he is supposed to be Grog's scientific right-hand man. He was also the one who concocted all those weird experiments with the tonic can, all of which led him to creating Grogaola. But we'll get to more of him later. Finally, we get to Susie. Now, if Tonic Trouble somehow got remade today, I don't think a character like Susie would be widely accepted by the public. In the original game, she's really nothing more than a shallow love interest just to give Ed a happy ending. Otherwise, she's just a stock sexy girl character who doesn't really do much. At this point, I decided to take things into my own hands and basically recreate Susie from a blank slate. I tried to give her character a bit more, well, character. In this remake, Susie would appear as more cool and quirky, featuring a new punk-esque wardrobe that isn't from the Stone Age. She's still the daughter of the Doc, but due to him being cooped up in his underground lab, she mainly lives by herself in the Doc's old house, working at a greenhouse by day and gaming at night. She now carries a bag with button pins featuring other Ubisoft IPs. Her and Ed would quickly become good friends at first, which would of course later develop into something more. In terms of sound design, Tonic Trouble utilized a ton of generic cartoon sound effects, ranging from to in a theoretical remake, I feel they'd opt for more original sound effects. I picture something sounding much more satisfying and poppy sounding. Though I think some of the more typical sound effects would still be used for more various situations, like falling and bouncing. For music, the original game tried for a more atmospheric soundtrack, with many tracks sounding softer and quiet for the most part. I can sorta see what they were going for, but in the final product, it just makes the game feel very barren and empty. Granted, this was way back in the latter half of the 90s, so technology wasn't quite there yet in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. But if this game were given a second chance, I think they should take another page from Spyro Reignited Trilogy and have it so every level has multiple variations of a given theme. The theme would transition to a different version depending on what's going on, such as soft and ambient for when Ed is standing around doing nothing, a more normalized and upbeat theme for normal gameplay, and a more frantic and intense beat for when you're in combat with enemies. That way, every theme in the game can sound more fleshed out and rocking while still keeping that atmospheric theming. Finally, the voices. Unfortunately, none of the original voice actors in the original Tonic Trouble were ever credited. All we can do is try to make out some of them based on their voices compared to roles in other Ubisoft games. We can make out that Ed is voiced by David Gassman, who also voices Rayman.
Yeah! Yippee! Wow! Ho-ho!
A little too on the nose, don't you think? As well as the Doc, and I think Grog in the latter half being voiced by Ken Starchovic, who also did voices in the Rayman games as well.
Ah, there you are again. You know, I must be losing my memory with my old age. I was sure I asked you to bring me 6 objects.
It's been a real pleasure having you as my adversary. You screw up all on your own.
I'm also pretty sure Susie was voiced by Karen Strassman.
Ed, you don't have all the feathers. You've got to concentrate or it's hopeless.
She apparently voiced Batilla in one of the educational Rayman spin-offs.
Welcome to my garden, Rayman. You can practice your powers here without a worry. You are safe from danger in my protected garden.
But I don't want to get too deep into voice actor speculation here. If Tonic Trouble were to be remade today, I think Ubisoft would try to get some of the original cast back. Assuming they even know themselves who voiced who. but I also think they would pull from other actors from their more recent games. Who they'd actually use is beyond me. I believe Ubisoft usually opts for non-union voice actors for their games, but of course I can't tell who is and isn't union. But that's what a little fan casting is for. Starting with the Doc, I would still keep Ken Starchovic as him, as he really does capture the witty and kooky inventor in the Doc nicely.
Great hammers and nails! Where'd they get this guy from? You couldn't find a needle in a magnetic field.
The pharmacist would be voiced by, or sound similar to, Kirk Thornton. He could sound very cunning and wicked for him.
So this is why you called me here. Silence, fool! I've suffered your presence long enough. I see no villains, just some fools whose only ability is wasting time.
Grog, I think, would be funny if he was voiced by David Gassman. He actually can do gruff and tough characters, and I think this would fit pretty well.
Is that what you call studying? What do you take me for, some kind of idiot? What do you think you're doing? Okay then, enough laughing. Anyway, these are combat techniques that can save your life.
For my redesign of Susie, she would be voiced by Casey Chase. She'd fit the Susie's youthful and witty characteristics.
All right, Beepo. That ought to fix the overheating problem. Can you believe it's been 3 months since Tech Magazine put me, us, on the cover? The article says nothing about dark matter, space-time manipulation, practical applications, nothing!
Finally, I'd have Ed be voiced by, or at least sound like, David Menken, who also voiced Rayman in Captain Laserhawk. Reference aside, I think he could fit Ed's more scrawny and dorky personality better than the original game.
Okay, stay with us. Must Dance Live coming right up after the break. Maybe because I'm different, I can make a difference. To give them hope. To give them dreams. Okay, look. Maybe we can beg. Come on. Let's beg for mercy. We're pretty good at that, right?
To reiterate, I don't know if they'd get all these actors specifically, but at least have people that sound similar enough to what I just showed. Now to the story. The game would begin very similar to the PC version, as it starts with a pre-rendered cutscene. It plays out mostly the same as the original, but with a few changes. Firstly, when Ed is proclaiming his love to this unseen girl alien, the part about lingerie would be cut out completely. In addition, Ed's dialogue here would be changed to be a little more unaware of what's happening. You see, I got a comment on my original Tonic Trouble video insisting that Ed is acting as some kind of homewrecker, as he states in the original that
Burke doesn't deserve you.
Implying that he was already aware that Burke and this unknown alien girl were already together. I, however, didn't read it that way. I assumed this alien girl was simply an acquaintance of Burke, making Ed worried, initiating him to confess his feelings before Burke potentially could. Not everyone can accurately read social cues all the time. So regardless of what the original's intentions were, I changed things to look a bit less intrusive and intentionally jerkish. When the dorm opens, Ed is met with said alien girl before moving out of the way for Burke. Yes, we would actually see this fabled alien girl this time around. Let's call her Cece. Actually seeing Cece with Burke in her dorm would be the final nail in Ed's coffin, as he is chased down by Burke. Afterwards, a heartbroken Ed still downs the tonic in the storage room for whatever reason. But this time it takes a page from the Nintendo 64 version, as Ed ingests the tonic, only to barf it up as the screws come alive as the trapdoor vent opens. Accidentally dropping the can, Ed makes a desperate attempt to grab the can to no avail. The can then falls through a series of chutes until falling towards Earth. We then cut to Earth as Grog is thrown out of a bar, but this time it's in the middle of a city instead of nowhere. When he ingests the tonic and transforms, a droplet from the can falls into the sewers, leading to everything else getting mutated. Alongside Grog, we can also see the pharmacist from within a dark alley observing the whole thing. Later on, Ed flies towards Grog's fortress, but this time his tower is located atop a volcano on a floating piece of land. Inside, instead of listening to an opera singer, Grog is watching the pharmacist showing a presentation about teaming up to use the can to make Groga. After Ed is left on the snowy mountains, the player starts by navigating a brief platforming section in a blizzard. Ed meets up with Agent XYZ and is recruited into the Grog Resistance. Reaching the top of the mountain, Ed is hit by a random frisbee and the snowboarding section from the original game begins. After reaching the South Plain, you are greeted by another cutscene where Ed meets Susie. Ed runs up to her in admiring awe, but is then thrown over his back as Susie mistakes him for one of Grog's goons. After being initially flustered and apologizing, Susie and Ed make introductions. Susie notes Ed, not expecting him to be so short, but is still fascinated by him being a real alien. She then says they'll need help from Susie's hermit father, the Doc, in order to progress. As in the original, he's still locked up in his lab. Susie would go free him herself, but she doesn't know where the secret entrance is. Going through the Doc's cave, Ed takes a highly technological stick from the remains of the defeated Robo-Suitcase boss. When Ed frees the Doc, he is both thankful for the rescue and is eager to help out and learn more about the extraterrestrial. Susie later notes how the Doc never took any time to notice her throughout her life, implying past distancing. The formula now is still the same as in the original, where Ed needs to collect 6 sets of objects for the Doc's machine. You still meet up with Susie at the end of each level to ensure you've collected every part, but if you haven't gotten every part, she'll give you subtle hints to where the missing ones are. Otherwise, they further their relationship more organically rather than instantly spiking to higher rated talk, let's leave it at that. However, the relationship between Ed and Susie would go further than that in this remake, even tying into the gameplay. What do I mean by that? Well, a fun idea I had was to include some kind of affection mechanic revolving around bonding with Susie. One feature in particular being throughout the game, you can play through these dating sim minigame segments where Ed takes a break to chat with Susie. These would basically play out like an average dating simulator game where you select different options for talking. Anime-styled art and all. This would even give the game a chance to flesh out and explore Ed and Susie's characters. A couple examples being Susie talking about how her late mother used to be strict and isolate her before dying in one of the Doc's experiments. Which, fun fact, is a reference to some of the Doc's dialogue from the Special Edition.
I've dug up my old prototype propeller concept. It didn't quite work last time. My poor wife.
We would learn even more about how, due to being alone and never socializing much, has caused Susie to be closed off and putting on this happy persona. On the other side, we also learn a bit more about Ed's life on the mothership Albatross and his alien species. He'd share how he was always done dirty and never actually appreciated despite his miscomings. Also about how the previously mentioned Cece used to let him on amongst Burke's bullying, leading to the opening cutscene, leading both of them to better understand each other and grow closer. Yes, it's just a silly optional minigame in the end, but I feel it has enough charm for it to possibly work. Aside from that, there are other ways to further things between the two. Remember when I said I'd remove extra lives? Well, in their place would be a brand new collectible, button pins. Scattered around the world are multiple different button pins to find and give Susie for her bag. All these buttons would have unique designs based on either things or characters from this game or other Ubisoft properties. You can even check them all out in a little gallery with brief descriptions. But what does this affection actually do for the game? I'll get to that in a bit. On to the latter half of the game, you still meet up with the pharmacist when heading into the pressure cooker. But this time, the pharmacist is a little more clear about how he ties into the story and what his intentions are. But before Ed exits out, the camera pans to behind the desk where you see the tonic can hiding underneath. Towards the end of the pressure cooker, the mushroom mage appears with a new lanky design that's different from the typical boxing mushrooms. When he steals the last piggy bank, Susie actually tries to stop him with a flying kick, but ends up crashing into Ed. However, unlike the original game, you don't need to collect any antidotes to enter the Mushroom Mage's lair. You just need to find it, being a secret lair and all. The actual boss fight with the Mushroom Mage is a bit more intense than in the original, with more choreographed attacks with a better idea of how and when to hit him, as opposed to just gun rushing it without much of a clue what to do. Also, the Mushroom Mage would have less of a potty mouth this time around. Actually, some of the more edgy content in this remake would be toned down. Again, for the sake of attempting for a more friendly ESRB rating. Reaching the end of the game, you still fight off against Grog's mech tower. In fact, this whole boss has been built up subtly throughout the game. One thing I forgot to mention is that in the Nintendo 64 version of the original, is that they added extra dialogue to some of the characters, hyping up how Grog was supposedly building a giant robot weapon. After defeat, the end cutscene plays like in the original. Ed slaps Grog with his stick, but once Grog takes a drink of his can, he starts to malfunction and act all warped. Notice how the can doesn't look the same as the can from the intro? What Grog has is a mass-produced can of Groga, while the real can is still with the pharmacist. Realizing he's been duped, Grog goes on about how the pharmacist ruined all his plans of tyranny until he goes poof out of existence. Or at least most of his body, as his two eyeballs are still intact as he bounces away Darktoon style. Ed reclaims the can unaware it's a fake, and then takes out a podium from his pocket as he celebrates like in the original. Susie then appears, but instead of giving a shoehorn message about the environment, she and Ed have a moment. Ed praises Susie about how cool she is for helping him get this far, but Susie responds with, "No, Ed, you're cool." She then says they should get back to the dock and get the can back to the other aliens on the Albatross. Now here's where the other stuff like the antidotes and affection come into play. What follows after is another cutscene that dictates how the game ends. You see, there's about 3 different endings you can unlock depending on how much you accomplish. First is the bad ending, in which you beat the game without getting all the antidotes. The Albatross ship arrives on Earth to reclaim the tonic can, but the General notices that Ed didn't get all the antidotes. He then scolds Ed, telling him to get back out there, making you backtrack to get the rest. Next, we have the middle ending where you get all the antidotes, but not max affection with Susie. The Albatross ship appears and the General takes the can and antidotes as Ed waves a sad goodbye to Earth as he goes inside the ship. It ends with the Albatross flying around the Earth, spreading the full antidote and turning everything back to normal, all while a sad Susie looks up towards the stars, already missing Ed. Finally, we get to the best ending where you basically collect everything the game has to offer. The General takes the collected antidotes and tonic can, but when he orders Ed to return aboard the ship, Ed refuses and decides to stay on Earth. The General is irritated at his disobedience at first, but realizes they'd only be losing a janitor. It then ends with the Albatross spraying the full antidote across the Earth as Ed and Susie wave goodbye to the ship. So that's how I'd remake Tonic Trouble. Looking back, I probably went on too long about the game's story rather than the gameplay. What can I say? I'm a storyteller, not a game designer. Once again, I really do believe Tonic Trouble would greatly benefit from a remake in the gameplay department. Given if it were to happen, which I realize is much less than unlikely. But hey, I can dream. If only I had a team of designers to help build a fan remake, then we'd be cooking. Or at the very least, a decompilation of the original game to modify. That's all I have to say for this video, but I also have a few more ideas regarding Tonic Trouble as a whole. If you're still with me and are interested in hearing more, let me know. I don't want to go on a further tangent and look cringe for no reason with nobody watching, but I guess I'll have to wait and see how this video reception goes. See you later! Thank you so much for watching the video. Want to be notified when I upload another? Just click the subscribe button and the little bell icon next to it. I'd love for my stuff to be seen by everyone possible.